In part 5, we're going to create the custom connector using the Azure function that we created in part 2. We will be focusing on the areas highlighted in red to create the custom connector for our Mongo API that we're exposing through an Azure function. So I'm not going to walk through all the details of configuring APIM for this scenario, but I want to just quickly walk through some very important pieces here. So you can see here that I've already added and exposed the API in APIM. You can see here there's a post action for create doc, and I also added an inbound processing rule here for cores to allow cores operations, because if you're going to be using this from a Power Platform app, then you're going to need to have this cores policy enabled, because Power Platform apps are ran in the browser. If you're using this from Power Automate, you can get by without this policy. So let's create the custom connector now. So first thing that we need to do is we need to expose our CosmosDB Mongo API through APIM, and then we'll leverage APIM to generate the necessary Swagger and Open API details for us. And from there, we'll create the connector using the exported specification from APIM. This can also be done via Postman v1 collection, but I prefer using APIM because it's much more enterprise ready. Let me walk through the process of setting up and creating the custom connector. So the first thing you'll need to do is you'll export your Open API definition from APIM. Then you'll go into the Create Custom Connector and you will use the import feature and specify that Open API JSON document that you exported from your APIM interface. Once you do that, it'll pretty much pre-populate these settings for you, and you can see that the endpoint for this particular request is going to RDC Mongo API. The next two important pieces that you'll need to configure, and this will not be done for you by default, is you'll need to make sure that you add a schema for the request body, and you simply do that by clicking on the import from sample, and then you'll basically add into the body a sample JSON document, and that will result in the schema that you see on the right there in that Swagger definition. And so when you look at the parameter for the body in item number 4 here, you will note that it has the following payload attributes: author, category, doc name, title. And so you'll note that when you take a look at the Swagger editor and the custom connector interface, you will see how it has those properties defined for you. This is very, very important, and this is how the Power Platform knows what the data types are and how to operate with this particular body. So once you have all that defined, then your connector is ready to go and ready to be used. Let's take a look at the configuration of the flow for the custom connector that I just created. There's really nothing special about this flow. If you just take a look there, you'll see that the connector has already been added. And what you'll note is that it's exposing 3 variables or 3 arguments here: doc name, title, category, and author. And you recall in the previous slide that I called out how important it was to ensure that the body has the proper schema created in the JSON Swagger. That's what allows the Power Platform interface to know what's being exposed here. So that's why that step was important. And in this flow, we're triggering it like we were triggering in the other examples that I demonstrated earlier. And next, all we're doing is just simply calling the custom connector and providing some values in that. And I'll demonstrate that a little later as we go into the demo itself. Okay, so let's take a look at the demo of the flow that is going to be using the custom connector that I created to interact with the CosmosDB that is using the Mongo API. So what I have here in front of me is a email that I'm going to send from the shared mailbox. And as you can see here, I've got some sort of bogus email address, so that's going to result in a delivery failure. And you can see the subject line is bad email and the body is also a bad email as well. So I'm going to go ahead and send this, and then we will receive an email in the shared mailbox that there was a failure. And I'll come back to that just in a moment. And for now, what I want to do is I'm going to navigate over to the flow itself. Give me a second here. This is in an in private browser here, so give me a moment to switch over. And what we'll see here is when the delivery uh, fails, the connector will get triggered and we'll see a new item here, which you just saw that real time. So if I load up this document here, we can see that this came in and literally I set the title to custom connector. So now if we navigate back over to the flow and take a look at the run history, we will be able to see the flow itself, how it was triggered, and we'll check run history. Give me 1 second to navigate over to it. So if we take a look here, I'm just going to refresh this real quick here, so you'll see the last run was 4 days ago, and you can see 54 seconds ago the flow successfully executed. So we'll take a quick look at it. So a message comes in to the shared mailbox. No need to dive into any of these variables here because they're not all that important. And since we're using the connector, I'm not using any of these. The only thing that's being used here is the connector itself, and I'm passing in values to the body to populate the document so the connector can create the document using the Mongo API client. That concludes part 5. And in part 6, we'll take a look at adding a document to our Cosmos Mongo API instance by making an HTTP post request directly to our API.